I'll tell you this first: the screaming didn't start when the lights went out. It started when the prison went quiet, when every man in my cell pressed a pillow over his ears, not to block the noise, but to block the voices. Because during the blackout, the thing locked beneath us didn't just hunt bodies, it learned names. It whispered them through the fog, mine included. And that's when I understood the truth no one ever says out loud: we weren't imprisoned alone. Something else was in with us, and it was patient. 2 years in an unnamed prison buried in the desert. I learned rules that were never written, laws enforced by screams, and why the guards were more afraid than the inmates. I watched good men break, bad men thrive, and something ancient crawl out of the dark every time the red lights began to spin. This isn't a story about monsters behind bars. It's about realizing the bars were there to protect the world from what was underneath us, and why only one of us ever walked out. If this opening pulled you in, subscribe to Whispers in the Dark and support the channel so we can keep bringing you darker, deeper, and more disturbing stories like this. Your curiosity fuels the next nightmare. I'll start with a confession, because anything less would be a lie. Before that prison, I was already disappearing. Not in the dramatic sense, no missing posters, no candlelight vigils. I mean the quieter kind of erasure. The kind where your name stops being spoken with warmth, where your phone stops buzzing, where the world moves on so smoothly, without you, that one day you realize you could vanish completely, and it would barely cause a ripple. So when they told me I was being transferred, I didn't ask where. People like me don't get explanations. We get orders, paperwork, and eventually silence. What I didn't know was that the silence would follow me. The day they moved me, the guard didn't call my name. He just opened the holding cell and nodded, like he was gesturing to a chair instead of a human being. My wrists were cuffed, the metal biting into skin that had already learned to flinch at anticipation. I expected a transport bus, the kind with barred windows and peeling paint, but instead, waiting in the yard, was a black SUV. Armored. Clean. So clean it looked unreal against the cracked concrete and rusted fences. 2 men in suits stood beside it. Not uniforms. Suits. Dark sunglasses. The kind of men you don't make eye contact with, not because they look dangerous, but because they look like they've already decided something about you. I remember thinking, irrationally, that I was about to die. Not executed. Just removed. They didn't speak when they opened the back door. Didn't respond when I asked where we were going. One of them pushed my head down as I climbed inside, not hard, just firm enough to remind me who owned gravity in that moment. The door shut with a sound too solid, too final. The windows were tinted so heavily that the world outside became a smear of light and shadow. That was the moment I understood something fundamental about fear. Fear isn't screaming or shaking. It's the slow realization that no one is required to explain what happens to you next. We drove for hours. 10, maybe more. Time became soft, stretched thin by exhaustion and withdrawal and the constant hum of the engine. My body was betraying me in small humiliating ways: tremors, nausea, sweat that soaked through my clothes, despite the cold air blasting from the vents. At some point, I stopped trying to ask questions. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I sensed that curiosity itself was a liability. I caught glimpses through the windshield when the sun hit just right. Desert. Endless. Bleached and unforgiving. A sign flashed by once Barstow, I think. Later, another pointing toward Death Valley. Mojave Territory. The kind of land that doesn't care if you live or die. The kind that swallows bones without comment. When the vehicle finally slowed, I felt it in my chest before I saw anything. That subtle shift in pressure, like your body knows before your mind catches up. The SUV turned off the road, tires crunching over gravel. The engine cut. One of the men opened the door and pulled me out by the arm. The sky was a hard, cloudless blue. The sun so bright it hurt. And there it was. The prison. At first glance, it was normal. That's the part that still unsettles me the most. No razor wire forests. No looming watchtowers bristling with guns. Just concrete buildings, tall fences, and a quiet that felt staged, like a movie set waiting for actors. I remember thinking, this is it. I was afraid of this. If I could go back, I would grab that version of myself by the shoulders and shake him until his teeth rattled. Normal is the most dangerous disguise there is. Inside, the air was cooler, heavier. The processing guard didn't introduce himself. He handed me a uniform dark gray, thicker than it needed to be, almost insulated, and told me to change. No shower. No privacy. Just his eyes on me the entire time, unblinking, like he was cataloging damage. When I asked where I was, he smiled. Not kindly. "Curiosity keeps this place fed," he said. "Don't help it." They cuffed me again and led me through corridors that all looked slightly wrong. Not broken off. The angles felt strange. The lights hummed at a pitch that sat just below discomfort, like tinnitus you couldn't quite acknowledge. As we passed an intersection, I saw a faded phrase painted high on the wall, partially scrubbed away. "Silence keeps you human." I didn't know why that sentence made my stomach drop, but it did. We entered Block A through heavy doors that sealed behind us with a sound I would later hear in my dreams. Inside, the space opened upward catwalks, metal stairs, multiple levels of cells stacked like shelves. The design was industrial, but the stairs were wrong. Hinged, reinforced, wired with motors at the joints, as if the building itself could rearrange its bones if it wanted to. "This is home," the guard said, uncuffing me. "Don't make it temporary." Then he left. No orientation. No threats. No rules. The door to my cell was open. A man was sitting on the lower bunk, elbows on knees, watching me with tired eyes. He looked kind. That alone made him dangerous, in retrospect. "You're the new guy," he said. "I'm Caleb." I told him my name, Ethan, and stepped inside. The cell held 4 bunks. 4 men. Or at least it would. Caleb pointed them out casually, like he was showing me a living room. "Top bunk's yours. Darius sleeps over there. Miles takes the one above me." As if summoned by his words, footsteps echoed on the catwalk outside. 2 men entered. One was tall, broad, his presence filling the space before he spoke. That was Darius. He looked at me the way a predator looks at unfamiliar terrain, calculating, already measuring outcomes. The other barely glanced my way. Miles. Average build. Blank expression. Eyes that didn't linger on faces but drifted instead to corners, ceilings, vents. He carried himself like someone who listened more than he spoke. No one explained why the cell door remained unlocked. I learned later that no one had to. That first night, I lay on my bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the prison breathe. Not metaphorically. Literally. The building made sounds deep, slow creaks that felt rhythmic, intentional. Somewhere far below, metal groaned. Somewhere even farther, something knocked. Once. Twice. Then stopped. Caleb didn't sleep. I could tell by his breathing. "First night's the hardest," he whispered. "You still expect things to make sense." "What happens here?" I asked. Silence stretched. Then, quietly, we wait. The days that followed dismantled my expectations piece by piece. There were no strict schedules. No constant guard patrols. We ate when food appeared. Showered when we wanted. Walked the yard under a sky so wide it felt like mockery. It was freedom, technically, but the kind that comes with invisible boundaries you don't dare test. I noticed something else too. Everyone avoided the ground floor. Not consciously. Not openly. It was more like an instinct. The way people avoid standing too close to a cliff edge without thinking about why. The cells down there were different. Thicker bars. Electronic locks. The men inside them paced, muttered, stared with eyes that looked sandblasted by insomnia. One afternoon, as I watched them from above, an older inmate caught my gaze and shook his head slowly. He tapped 2 fingers against his ear, then pointed downward. "Don't listen." That night, Miles showed me his notebook. It was filled with dates. Every page identical. One word written again and again in tight, deliberate letters. "Listen." "What does it mean?" I asked. He closed the notebook. "It means the prison isn't empty." I laughed, because that's what you do when your mind is offered a thought it can't survive holding. Miles didn't laugh back. The first real warning came during breakfast. A man cut in line. Just that. A small thing. Another inmate protested. Voices rose. For half a second, it felt like a normal prison. Then the doors slammed open. Armed guards poured in, efficient, silent, overwhelming. No shouting. No chaos. They struck the man once hard enough to drop him and dragged him away while the rest of us lay flat on the floor, faces pressed to concrete. As the guards left, someone whispered, "Black Sea." I asked Caleb what that meant. He looked at the nearest tower before answering. "It means you won't see him again." That was also the day I realized we all had keys. Real keys. Metal. Heavy. Every cell. Except the ones downstairs. Every night, we locked ourselves in, not because we were told to, but because something else woke up after dark. I won't describe it yet. Not fully. Because the truth is, during those first weeks, even I didn't understand what I was afraid of. I just knew that when the red emergency lights flickered during a routine test, every conversation stopped. Every body tensed. And when the hum beneath the prison deepened, like a throat clearing in the dark, I felt something cold settle behind my eyes. Fear, I learned, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just waits for you to notice it's been there all along. And by the time you do, it already knows your name. Block teaches you a very specific kind of fear. Not the sharp, panicked kind you feel when something is chasing you, but the slow, corrosive kind that settles into your bones when nothing seems wrong, yet everything feels staged. Artificial. Like a smile that lasts half a second too long. If part 1 was about being erased, then Block A was about being kept. Kept comfortable. Kept breathing. Kept just sane enough to notice what you were losing. The first full morning I woke up there, sunlight poured in through the narrow window like this was some low-budget rehab facility instead of a maximum security prison that technically didn't exist. For a moment, just a stupid, fragile moment, I thought maybe I had overreacted. Maybe my mind was filling in blanks with paranoia. Maybe this place was just unconventional. That thought didn't survive breakfast. The food was decent. That alone should have been the warning. Real eggs. Warm bread. Coffee that tasted like coffee instead of rust and punishment. Men sat at metal tables and ate quietly, exchanging murmurs that sounded like normal conversation if you didn't listen too closely. But when you did listen, really listen, you noticed patterns. Nobody asked questions. Nobody complained. Nobody talked about the future. Conversations stayed shallow, like fingers skimming the surface of deep water, without daring to break it. Sports teams from years ago. Weather patterns in places no one here could reach anymore. Old jokes repeated, so often they'd lost any trace of humor. But people laughed anyway, a second too late, like it was expected. I watched faces more than mouths. That was my mistake. Caleb noticed. He always did. "You look at people like you're counting exits," he whispered as we sat shoulder to shoulder, trays between us. That'll get you noticed." "By who?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip of coffee, eyes flicking just once toward one of the guard towers visible through the narrow windows. The guards inside weren't moving. They rarely did. But something about the way Caleb lowered his voice made my skin prickle. "By anyone who thinks you're thinking too hard." That was the first real rule of Block A. Thinking was dangerous. After breakfast, the doors stayed open. That still messes with me, even now. No whistles. No head counts shouted through megaphones. Men drifted back to their cells, out to the yard, into the showers. Some exercised. Some slept. Some just stood on the catwalks, staring down at the ground floor, like sailors watching dark water for fins. I followed Darius out into the yard that morning, mostly because I wanted to understand him. He moved like the place belonged to him, like the fences and towers were suggestions, not limits. Big man. Thick neck. Hands scarred in the casual way of someone who never flinched from using them. "You keep close to Caleb," he said without looking at me. It wasn't a question. "He's the only one who talks," I replied. Darius smiled. It wasn't friendly. Exactly. We walked beneath a sun that felt too close, too bright. Beyond the fence stretched endless desert flat, merciless, stretching toward Joshua Tree in one direction and nothing at all in the other. Escape was a fantasy here, and not even an attractive one. The land itself would finish what the prison started. "That fence isn't to keep us in," Darius said suddenly. "You know that, right?" I waited. "Silence is currency in places like that." "It's to keep things from wandering too far," he continued. "This place is a lid." I stopped walking. He didn't. I should have taken that as a warning too, that Darius liked to plant ideas and walk away from the consequences. Back inside, I started noticing the architecture more. You don't realize how much a building can watch you until you're trapped inside one that feels alert. The catwalks weren't just pathways. They were choke points. The stairs, those damned stairs, shifted slightly when you stepped on them, as if testing your weight. Motors hummed faintly inside the walls, always ready. Ready for what? Miles caught me staring at the joints where the stairs met the catwalk. "They fold," he said. "When?" I asked. "During blackouts." That word again. Blackout. It followed me through the day like a shadow I couldn't shake. In the showers, steam clouded the room, and for a moment the air felt too similar to the fog I'd glimpsed outside the night before. Men washed quickly, efficiently. No one lingered. I saw a symbol carved into the tile near one drain, a crude eye with its lid stitched shut. I pointed it out to Miles. He shook his head. "Don't touch it. Don't trace it. Don't acknowledge it." Why? Because someone always does. And then they start hearing things. That night, I learned why the ground floor mattered. Dinner was nearly over when the noise started. It wasn't loud at first. Just a dull thud beneath the floor, like something heavy being shifted in a basement. Most of the men froze mid-bite. Some bowed their heads. One man crossed himself, then stopped, like he remembered too late that faith had rules here. "What is that?" I whispered. Caleb's hand closed around my wrist, hard enough to hurt. "Don't react." The thud came again, louder. Metal scraping on concrete. Then a scream rose from downstairs, cut off so abruptly it sounded like the tape had been ripped from the machine of reality itself. No alarms. No guards. Just silence rushing in to fill the gap. When it was over, men stood up, returned their trays, and walked away like nothing had happened. I stayed seated, heart hammering, skin buzzing. Darius paused beside me. "You hear that?" he asked softly. "Hear what?" He leaned closer. I could smell sweat and iron on him. Exactly. That was when I understood something that still terrifies me more than the creatures themselves. Block A wasn't meant to punish us. It was meant to condition us. to teach us which sounds to ignore, which instincts to suppress, which parts of ourselves to slowly amputate in the name of survival. Comfort was the bait, freedom was the lie, and fear, real fear, was carefully rationed, administered in doses just large enough to keep us compliant, but not large enough to make us rebel. That night, when I lay on my bunk listening to the prison hum, I finally noticed the rhythm beneath it. Not random, measured, like breathing. And somewhere below, something answered back. I locked my cell door with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, not because anyone told me to, but because every instinct I had left was screaming the same truth. Whatever lived under Block A didn't need bars. It only needed patience. And Block A was teaching us how to wait. Block A didn't teach me what to fear. It taught me who to fear. That distinction matters more than you think. Fear of monsters is primitive, honest. You hear something growl in the dark, and your body reacts the way it was designed to. But fear of people, of the quiet, smiling man sitting 2 seats away from you at breakfast, that kind of fear rots you from the inside. It turns every thought into a calculation, every sentence into a risk assessment. And in Block A, that was the real sentence we were serving. The rats were never announced. No roll call. No warnings. No official designation. The concept of a rat passed through the block the way disease does through whispers, glances, sudden disappearances. Someone would say the wrong thing. Someone would ask the wrong question. And the next day, their bunk would be empty, their name avoided like it carried a curse. I learned early that rats didn't look like villains. They looked like victims. They cried. They shook. They talked too much about missing their families. They asked you questions framed as sympathy. How are you holding up? What did you do to land here? And watched your face instead of listening to your answers. They nodded too eagerly. Reacted too fast. They wanted to be needed. That was how the prison recruited them. It offered a simple trade: information for immunity. Speak, and maybe you stay in Block A. Stay quiet, and the floor beneath you might open one night and swallow you whole. The genius of it, the cruelty, was that no one ever confirmed the deal existed. Which meant paranoia did most of the work for them. Every man was a suspect. Every silence carried weight. I started noticing patterns. Men who never made eye contact with guards, but were always somehow in the right place at the right time. Men who violated small rules and were forgiven. Men who returned from questioning looking shaken, but intact. Darius called them the chosen. They don't survive because they're smart, he told me one afternoon as we leaned against the railing, staring down at the ground floor. They survive because they're useful. What about you? I asked. He laughed under his breath. I'm worse than useful. I'm predictable. That chilled me more than any threat. The keys were the next piece of the puzzle. Every cell in Block A had one. Heavy, iron, old-fashioned. No electronic locks. No remote controls. Just a simple mechanism that clicked loud enough to echo in the corridor when you turned it. At night, one by one, men locked themselves in. Not because anyone told us to. Because those who didn't last. I asked Caleb about it on the 3rd night, after I noticed him watching the door like it might blink. What happens if you leave it open? I whispered. He swallowed before answering. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes you hear knocking. I waited. From where? I asked. Inside, he said. Not outside the cell. Inside the room. Like it's already there and just wants permission. I didn't sleep that night. The first time I truly understood the cost of breaking the rules came during lunch a week later. The line was long, slow, and quiet. Trays slid across steel counters. Hands took food without complaint. No one rushed. No one lingered. A man near the front knew, judging by the way his eyes darted, stepped forward out of turn. Just half a step. barely noticeable. Another inmate cleared his throat. That was all it took. The new guy snapped. "I've been standing here for 20 minutes, he said, voice raised just enough to crack. "I just want my food." The room froze. I felt it before I saw it, the collective withdrawal, like everyone had just taken a step back from an invisible blast radius. The man behind the counter didn't move, didn't react. He simply set the ladle down. The alarms didn't blare. That's the part that still disturbs me. The doors opened quietly. 6 guards entered with rifles raised, their movements rehearsed, economical. No shouting, no warnings. One of them struck the man across the face with the butt of his weapon. The sound wet, final cut through the room sharper than a gunshot would have. I said, "Get down," the guard repeated calmly, as if continuing a conversation that had never paused. They dragged the man away while we lay on the floor, faces pressed to cold concrete. I could feel the vibration of his screams through the building as they pulled him toward the doors at the far end. Someone whispered, "Black Sea." Someone else whispered a prayer and stopped halfway through. When it was over, we stood up, collected our trays, and finished eating. No one spoke about it. Not then. Not ever. That was the second rule of block a witness without memory. If you remembered too clearly, you started asking yourself questions. And questions were invitations. Miles reinforced that lesson later that evening. He was sitting on his bunk, writing in that damn notebook again. Listen. Listen over and over like a spell. I asked him why he kept doing it. "So I don't forget," he said. "Forget what?" "That the prison hears us," he replied. "Not just the guards. The walls. The floors. The space between sentences." I laughed nervously. "That's not how buildings work." He looked up at me then, really looked at me. "You think this is a building?" That night, as if to prove his point, I noticed something new. My food tray had been returned upside down. At first I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the scratch marks on the underside. Fresh. Intentional. A symbol I'd never carved, but recognized instantly. The same stitched eye I'd seen in the showers. I felt my stomach drop. Someone had access to my tray after I ate. Someone wanted me to know they'd touched it. When I showed it to Caleb, his face drained of color. "Don't show that to anyone else," he said. "Not Darius. Not Miles. Especially not Miles." "Why?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because whoever did that wants you to notice. And the moment you start looking back, you're part of the game." That was when I realized something that still haunts me. Blocka wasn't about enforcing rules. It was about teaching us to enforce them on ourselves. We watched what we said, how we stood, where we looked. We censored our thoughts before they reached our mouths. We learned to flinch internally and smile externally. We learned that survival didn't require innocence or strength, it required restraint. And the rats. They thrived in that environment because they had already given up something essential. They had traded trust for time. I hate them. I really do. But I hate the system that made them more. Because when you strip away the fences and the guns and the monsters beneath the floor, what you're left with is a truth I can't unlearn. The most effective prison isn't built to contain bodies. It's built to fracture loyalty. To turn men into watchers of one another. To make silence feel safer than honesty. To convince you that survival is a solo act, even when you're surrounded by others. By the end of my second week in Block A, I had stopped asking questions entirely. By the end of my third, I had started answering ones no one had asked. And by the time I realized what that meant, it was already too late. Because the prison wasn't just listening anymore. It was taking notes. The first blackout didn't arrive with drama. There was no countdown. No warning siren. No final announcement over a crackling speaker telling us to prepare. It arrived the way a bad thought does quietly, slipping into the room while you're distracted, settling behind your eyes before you realize your mood has changed. I remember the exact moment it began, because I was laughing. Someone had told a joke at dinner, an old one. Dry, harmless, and for half a second it felt like a normal night. Like we were just men killing time in a strange place. I was mid-breath, mouth open, when the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then darkness poured over block like a physical thing. Not the soft dark of night. Not the comforting dimness of a power outage. This was absolute. Total. The kind of darkness that doesn't feel empty, it feels occupied. Every sound stopped. The laughter died in my throat. Forks froze midair. Somewhere, a tray clattered to the floor, the echo ringing far longer than it should have. And then one by one small red lights blinked on along the ceiling. Emergency lights. But they weren't steady. They rotated, slowly, methodically. A single red beam swept across the block, illuminating faces in fragments, eyes wide, jaws clenched, hands shaking. When the light passed over me, I felt exposed in a way I can't fully explain, like something had just counted me and moved on. That's when Caleb moved. He didn't panic, didn't speak. He reached up, grabbed his pillow, and pressed it hard over his ears like he was trying to seal his skull shut. Darius did the same instantly, rolling onto his side, shoulders hunched. Miles followed without hesitation, curling inward, whispering something I couldn't hear. "What are you doing?" I hissed. No one answered. The red light came around again, and from somewhere deep beneath the floor, something answered back. At first it sounded like machinery and engine turning over after years of neglect. A low, grinding vibration that crawled up through the metal frame of my bunk and into my bones. The floor trembled, just slightly, like a warning breath before a scream. Then came the sound I'll never forget. Not a roar. Not a growl. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate strikes of metal on metal. Knock. 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 It came from below. From the direction of the ground floor. From further than that. From a place I hadn't known existed until that moment, a depth that felt older than the prison itself. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me to move, to do something. The red light swept past again, and for a heartbeat I saw the expressions on my cellmates' faces. Darius looked calm, not brave, familiar, like a man who had survived a storm before and knew exactly which way the wind would blow. Miles was pale, lips moving soundlessly beneath the pillow pressed to his ears. Counting, maybe. Or praying. Caleb was crying. Silent tears streamed down his temples, soaking into the thin mattress beneath him. His eyes were squeezed shut, his hands shaking so badly the pillow slipped, and he jammed it back into place like the sound might crawl inside his head if he didn't. That was the moment fear finally found its shape. The knocking came again, faster this time. More insistent. And layered beneath it, barely audible, was another sound like wet fabric dragging across concrete. I backed toward the cell door without thinking. "Don't," Caleb whispered. His voice was muffled, broken. "Please, don't go near it." "Why?" I asked, though part of me already knew. The red light paused directly outside our cell. For a moment, everything was still. Then the fog came. It didn't pour in. It didn't rush. It seeped. A pale, rolling mist began to crawl across the floor below, rising through the gaps in the catwalks, climbing the walls with unnatural patience. It wasn't smoke. It didn't behave like vapor. It moved with intent, folding in on itself, forming shapes that collapsed the moment you tried to focus on them. And then I heard it. My name. Not shouted. Not whispered. Spoken conversationally, like someone calling me from another room. "Ethan." I spun toward the sound, heart slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. The fog thickened near the cell door, swirling, pooling like it was gathering courage. "Ethan," it said again. Caleb screamed. Not loud, not long, just a sharp, involuntary sound torn from somewhere deep in his chest, like his body had reacted before his mind could stop it. He clamped the pillow tighter over his ears, rocking now, breath coming in ragged gasps. "That's why," he sobbed. "That's why you don't listen." The stairs moved. I didn't realize they could until they did. Motors roared to life beneath the floor, the sound jarring, violent. The metal staircases that connected the upper levels to the ground floor began to fold upward, retracting like limbs pulling away from a hot surface. Hinges screamed under the strain. Catwalks shifted, locking into place with final, echoing clangs. The ground floor was being sealed off. Not to protect us. To trap them. Doors below us burst open in a cascade of electronic clicks, one after another, like a firing line of digital executions. I could hear shouting, now panicked. Desperate voices rising from the cells beneath us. "Help! Please! They're opening. Why are they opening? I didn't do anything." The fog surged. It poured through the open doors on the ground floor, swallowing the screaming men whole. Shapes moved within it, low, fast silhouettes skittering across the concrete, with too many joints and not enough symmetry. I caught glimpses only in flashes, as the red light swept past, limbs bent the wrong way, torsos stretched thin like taffy, heads that tilted too far, mouths that opened wider than anatomy should allow. Gunfire erupted from the guard towers outside. Short, controlled bursts. I realized with a sick lurch that the guards weren't aiming at the ground floor. They were aiming at the walls, at the fence, at anything that tried to climb. Anything that gets past the mist. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Shoot it. Anything. Not anyone." The screams reached a pitch that made my teeth ache. I heard bones crack, not snap, not shatter, but crack, like thick branches being twisted under slow, steady pressure. I heard pleading collapse into wet choking sounds. I heard laughter. Not human laughter. A sound like air being forced through a throat that didn't need it. I couldn't look away. That's the part I hate myself for. I stood at the railing, fingers white-knuckled around the cold metal, watching the fog boil and churn below, watching men disappear into it and never come back out. I watched something drag a body, still moving across the floor toward the main doors. Its gait uneven. Its grip tender in a way that made my stomach flip. The red light swept over the yard outside, and for a split second I saw a trail of dark smears on the perimeter wall marks, where something had tried to climb and failed. Then the fog thickened further, swallowing everything. The blackout lasted maybe 5 minutes. Maybe 10. Time stopped working properly after the first scream. When it was over, the fog retreated the same way it came, slow, deliberate, like it had completed a task and was no longer in a hurry. The red lights blinked off. Normal lighting flickered back to life, harsh and unforgiving. The silence afterward was worse. No movement. No voices. Just the distant hum of the prison settling back into itself. Caleb lowered the pillow slowly, like he was afraid the sound might still be there waiting. His eyes were red, unfocused. He didn't look at me. "Is it over?" he asked. "I think so," I said, though I wasn't sure. Miles sat up, face ashen. "It always is," he murmured, "until next time." Morning came without ceremony. The guards were back. More of them this time. They handed out gloves, mops, body bags. No explanations. No condolences. Just work. The ground floor looked like a place violence had passed through, not settled. Scratches gouged into the concrete. Bent bars. Dark stains that had been scrubbed thin but not erased. Entire cells stood empty, doors yawning open like missing teeth. We cleaned in silence. I counted the empty cells. I stopped counting halfway through. No one talked about the blackout. Not at breakfast. Not in the yard. not in whispers behind closed doors. It became an unspoken rule stronger than any written law that what happened during the blackout stayed buried beneath the floor with the things that caused it. But something had changed. In me. Because I had heard my name. And no matter how much I told myself it was stress, hallucination, fear playing tricks on my mind, one truth lodged itself deep in my chest and refused to leave. The thing beneath us wasn't blind. It wasn't mindless. It wasn't just hunting. It was learning. And the first lesson it learned was who I was. Caleb didn't break all at once. That's the lie people tell themselves to stay comfortable, that fear snaps you in half in some dramatic moment. That madness arrives screaming and obvious, that you'll recognize the instant someone is lost. The truth is uglier. The truth is quieter. Caleb unraveled the way damp paper does when you keep folding it along the same line. After the first blackout, he stopped sleeping. Not the restless kind of not sleeping where you toss and turn, waking every hour. No, he simply lay there, eyes open, staring at nothing, breathing so shallow I sometimes leaned down to check if his chest was still moving. When I asked him about it, he smiled, small and apologetic, like he'd forgotten to return a borrowed book. "If I sleep," he said, "I hear them clearer." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to tell him it was stress, trauma, echoes of a bad night. I wanted to be the kind of man who believes fear fades if you name it properly. But I had heard my name in the fog. So instead, I said nothing. That was my first real failure. The days after the blackout settled into a new rhythm. Not calmer, never calmer, but controlled, like the prison had inhaled deeply and was holding its breath. Guards were more visible now, watching from towers, rifles slung but ready. The ground floor remained sealed, its silence heavier than the screams had been. We cleaned. We ate. We waited. Caleb stopped going outside. At first, he just skipped the yard, then meals, then showers. He stayed in the cell, knees drawn to his chest, hands pressed against his ears even when the prison was quiet. He flinched at footsteps, at laughter, at the hum of the lights. "Come on," I told him one afternoon, trying to sound normal, trying to be the version of myself that still believed normalcy was a thing you could offer someone. Just for a few minutes. The sun helps. He shook his head without looking at me. The sun doesn't reach down there. I sat beside him on the bunk, close enough to feel the tremor running through his body. "You're safe right now," I said. He finally looked at me then. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with red, like he hadn't cried so much as bled his fear out slowly. "No," he said softly. "I'm just not needed tonight." That sentence lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. Caleb had always been the softest among us. The one who shared food without being asked. The one who remembered names. The one who still said thank you to the man behind the serving window, even when his hands shook too badly to hold the tray steady. And the prison hated him for it. I know that sounds dramatic. I know it sounds like I'm projecting intention onto concrete and steel and systems that don't have feelings. But I was there. I watched how the guard's eyes lingered on him. I watched how Darius smirked when Caleb flinched. I watched how Miles stopped making eye contact altogether, like he'd already begun the grieving process. Good men don't survive places like that. They remind the system of something it's trying to erase. Caleb started talking to himself. Not full conversations, just fragments. Half-formed sentences muttered under his breath while he stared at the wall. Numbers sometimes. Names sometimes. Once, I heard him whisper my name, and it sent a cold spike of panic straight through me. "I don't want them to use your voice," he said when I confronted him. "That's how they get you. They practice." "What do you mean practice?" I asked. He shook his head violently. I said too much. I listened. That's the mistake. You have to let the sound pass through you. Like water. If you hold onto it, it stays. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he was spiraling, that he needed help. But there was no help here. No counselors. No psychologists. No chaplains offering hollow reassurances. There was only the system. And the system had decided Caleb was surplus. The morning they took him, nothing seemed different. That's what terrifies me the most when I think back on it. There were no sirens. No lockdowns. No dramatic escalation. Just another day in Block A, sunlight creeping across the floor, men lining up for breakfast. Caleb hadn't eaten in 2 days. I brought his tray back to the cell, set it down carefully like the sound might offend something unseen. "You need to eat," I said. "Please." He stared at the food like it was something foreign. "Dangerous." "I don't want to be heavy," he whispered. "Heavy?" I asked. "When they carry you," he said. "I don't want to make it hard for them." My stomach dropped. I opened my mouth to say anything, and that's when the guards appeared at the end of the catwalk. 2 of them. No weapons raised. No urgency. They walked with the casual confidence of men who knew they wouldn't be challenged. "Caleb Ruiz," one of them said. Caleb flinched at the sound of his full name. "That's not," I started, but Darius's hand shot out, gripping my arm with bruising force. "Don't," he hissed. Caleb stood slowly, legs shaking, eyes darting around the cell like he was memorizing it. "I didn't break any rules," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't hurt anyone." The guard tilted his head slightly. "You're unwell." "I'm fine," Caleb insisted. "I just need more time." The other guard stepped forward and snapped cuffs around his wrists with practiced ease. Time slowed in a way I can't properly describe. Every instinct I had screamed at me to do something: block the door, throw a punch, run. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, watching the system work the way it always did. Caleb looked at me over his shoulder as they led him away. There was no panic in his eyes, just relief. "Don't listen when I knock," he said. Then he was gone. They didn't say where they were taking him. They didn't have to. Block C, Black C. The place no one returned from. I didn't see him dragged through the yard. I didn't hear him scream. The prison swallowed him quietly, efficiently, like it had done this 1,000 times before. I broke that day, not outwardly. Not in a way anyone noticed. But something essential in me, something stubborn and human, cracked under the weight of my own cowardice. I hated the guards. I hated the prison. I hated myself. But most of all, I hated how easy it had been. Darius found me later, sitting alone at one of the yard tables, staring at nothing. He was dead the moment he stopped pretending, Darius said flatly. "That's the rule." "He was sick," I shot back. "He needed help." Darius shrugged. "So do a lot of people. That doesn't make them useful." I wanted to hit him. I wanted to feel my knuckles connect with bone, to feel something real. But I didn't. Because part of me understood exactly what he meant. That's the most damning part. The prison doesn't just kill your friends. It recruits your understanding. That night I lay awake in the cell that felt larger without Caleb in it, listening to the hum beneath the floor. The knocking didn't come. The fog didn't rise. The prison was quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something that made my skin crawl. Caleb hadn't been taken because he was weak. He had been taken because he could still feel. Because he still reacted. Because he still believed the voices mattered. The prison doesn't want your strength. It wants your indifference. It wants you hollow enough that when the next name is called, maybe yours, maybe someone else's, you won't scream. You won't fight. You'll just step forward and hope you're light enough not to slow the process down. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, and made myself a promise. A stupid one. A dangerous one. I told myself I wouldn't break like Caleb. Not because he was wrong, but because I couldn't afford to be right. And somewhere beneath us, something shifted. Like it had heard my decision. Like it approved. Miles didn't speak to me for 3 days after Caleb was taken. Not a word. Not a glance. Not even the courtesy of pretending I wasn't there. He moved through the cell like a shadow that had learned to breathe quiet, efficient, distant. If I asked him something, he answered with silence. If Darius spoke, Miles listened without reacting, like he was storing every syllable for later dissection. At first, I thought he was grieving. I was wrong. Grief is loud inside. What Miles carried was something colder. Sharper. Purpose doesn't wail, it hardens. The truth came out on a night when the prison was too quiet to be trusted. No blackout. No alarms. No fog. Just the hum beneath the floor, steady and patient, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to any living thing. Darius was asleep, snoring softly, one arm draped over his chest like he owned it. I lay on my bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying Caleb's last words over and over until they lost meaning and became noise. Then I heard Miles shift, not the restless movement of someone chasing sleep. This was deliberate, controlled. "Ethan," he said softly. I nearly fell out of the bunk. "You don't say names at night," I whispered back, heart racing. "That's why I waited," he replied. I climbed down and sat across from him, keeping my voice low. "What is it?" He studied my face for a long moment, like he was deciding whether I was a liability or an asset. Whatever conclusion he reached, it wasn't a comforting one. "You saw what happened to Caleb," he said. I nodded. "And you understand why," he continued. "I understand that this place kills people," I said. "Slowly, or all at once." "That's not what I mean," Miles said. "I mean you understand how it chooses." I hesitated. "That's why you're still here," he said quietly. "You noticed." The way he said it made my skin crawl. "Noticed what?" I asked. "That they don't just take anyone," he replied. "They take people who listen. People who react. People who haven't learned how to be background noise." I swallowed. "So what are you saying?" Miles leaned closer, lowering his voice until I had to strain to hear him over the hum of the building. "I'm saying Caleb wasn't the target," he said. "He was practice." Something in my chest tightened. "For what?" "For the next phase," Miles answered. "For sorting." I laughed under my breath despite myself. "You're starting to sound like him." Caleb was right, Miles snapped, a flash of anger cutting through his calm. "He just didn't go far enough." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that didn't come. "My brother was taken 3 months before you arrived," Miles said suddenly. The words landed with weight. Not drama finality. "He was in Block A," Miles continued. "Quiet. Careful. Better at keeping his head down than I ever was. They told me he was transferred. Then they told me he was released. Then they stopped answering." I didn't interrupt. I had learned better. "I volunteered for this place," Miles said. "Pulled strings. Took a charge I knew would land me here. Because no one disappears like that unless they're feeding something." Feeding. The word echoed unpleasantly in my mind. "You think he's still alive?"